Well, John, if there's going to be any.
Well, that's about it, Allard. As we predicted from Friday's qualifying session, there was going to be rain, and rain aplenty there is. And this, the fastest part of the circuit, is also the wettest part of the circuit. And here you see Morbidelli successfully navigating, I think is the best word to describe conditions here right now. Appalling, very, very wet. And in fact, in Japan, when it rains, it just doesn't rain. It deluges, it's torrential rain, it's monsoon rain. And really what we need here are effectively the Japanese spec rain tires. Now, Goodyear supply the tires to everybody, and those deep treaded wet weather tires normally cope with anything that we see in World Championship Formula One racing, but in Japan, well, you need something even better. And I think we're not going to see an awful lot of action here this afternoon because, well, first of all, nobody's going to improve, and secondly, there's a great danger that if you go out, you may just get caught by one of those rivers running across the circuit, put the car on the barrier. And well, teams, they're on a 2-race package right now. They will not want to be sending back to Europe for new chassis, more bodywork, more corners. So I don't know what we're going to see, but I think at this particular stage of this qualifying session, well, there you see it, nobody is on the circuit.
20 cars went out this morning for the unofficial warm-up session, while Stefano Modena is on the circuit at the moment. Nigel Mansell was fastest this morning with a 1:58.693, and that was a time done in his 4th lap. John Alesi, as John mentioned yesterday, always sensational in the wet, was 2nd fastest, 58.799. Schumacher, another young man, always fast in the wet, as we've seen in Spa when he won his very first Grand Prix. 3rd fastest, a 2:00.196. Then Ayrton Senna was 4th on a 2:01.697. Riccardo Patrese 5th on a 2:02.367. That is the top 5 with all the people you would expect in there, John. And then 6th fastest, Formula One returnee Jan Lammers in the March Ilmore.
Well, I know, Allard, you're very surprised.
I'm not.
Well, you are, Allard, because Jan's in his first race in over a decade. But I have to say, I'm not surprised. Jan is a very good driver indeed. But of course, he knows Suzuka very well, and he's raced here in the rain in conditions probably the equal, if not worse, than we're seeing right now. And he will know precisely on the circuit where water lies, where water runs across the circuit. That kind of local knowledge really is invaluable. But of course, it's all meaningless. All it does is provide the driver with a little bit of insight into conditions. And I hope on Sunday conditions are not like this, because really it would be quite difficult to start the Grand Prix with this amount of water around the circuit.
Another thing with Lammers, John, we mustn't forget, while we're watching Ayrton Senna, I said he was brought up on the skid pan. When he was about 11 years old, he was, I think he could do 360-degree spins with a car before he could actually drive them. So the man is used to slide around for the last 25 years of his life. Anyway, 7th, Michele Alboreto, who qualified right at the back of the grid in 24th position, was 7th in the wet. Pierluigi Martini 8th, Johnny Herbert 9th this morning, Jerry Boutsen 10th, JJ Leto 11th, 12th was Nicola Larini with that active suspension Ferrari, Mauricio Grujimin in 13th, Olivier Grouillard 14th, Aguri Suzuki 15th, Naspetti in the 2nd march was 16th, 17th Gianni Morbidelli, 18th Eric Comas, 19th Mika Hakkinen, and 20th and last of the runners was Christian Fittipaldi, although I must say both Hakkinen and Fittipaldi only did 2 laps this morning and came straight back into the pit. So Mansell again being the fastest driver. Alesi was very close, but if you look at that difference, John, Alesi did 13 laps this morning, Mansell only 4, and it could have just been that Alesi was out when it was just a little bit drier.
Well, that's always the problem, Allard, you know, with these sessions run in the rain. Unless conditions remain constant, you can find a little window where the track just begins to show the hint of a dry line, then the rain falls again. Really, it's fairly meaningless in terms of performance. One thing that is for sure, Jean Alesi is absolutely outstanding in the rain, and of course wet weather will negate all the disadvantages that the Ferrari car has in dry conditions. And of course Alesi, and I would say arguably Ferrari, are right now praying for a wet race, because for them, that's about the only way they have a chance of getting one of their two men on the podium. Nicola Larini, of course, probably will try and race the active car, but in reality that car is not a serious threat. It's really down to Jean Alesi, and well, in these conditions, frankly, anybody could win a race.
Riccardo Patrese there taking the wet weather line, and as John said earlier, I think it's more a case of finding the dry spots on the circuit than really go for the ideal racing line, John, isn't it?
You've got to really use the circuit to your best advantages. Best advantage in these conditions. What would ordinarily be a dry line, I mean, we see Patrese staying quite away wide off the apex. He's running on the part of the circuit what you'd call ordinarily green. That's the part of the circuit that doesn't have rubber on it. The reason is that in wet weather conditions, it is often quicker to go the long way around a corner. Forget the textbook about being a Grand Prix driver, taking a natural apex, going out to the exit. You take the bit of road that gives you the most grip, and sometimes that's the long way around a corner. Now, through something like the chicane, there's not an awful lot you can do. You just got to go right, left, and that's it. There's only one way through there. But coming out of that chicane, of course, great test for these traction devices. Williams are running them, McLaren are running them, and other teams are developing them. Of course, in 1993, with this new tire rule, more or less, I think all the major teams will have a traction control device fitted. Williams are almost certain to be running an ABS braking system on the car. And Nigel Mansell, really, he was talking in the pits, spoofing, one might say, and he thinks that all these developments, the technology that is coming into Formula One car, really, he says you could put a puppet into the car and he could win in it. Now, I hope he's not referring to his successor at Williams for 1993, Alain Prost, because Alain is not as tall in stature, but he ain't no puppet, that is for sure.
Well, you wouldn't say nasty things about Prost, would he, John?
Well, he's saying a lot of very good things about IndyCar racing. He's talking about how nice it is to get back into a car where the driver's input is very great indeed. Nigel won the World Championship this year with this car. This is the most advanced Formula One car I think we've ever seen in the history of Grand Prix racing. Unfortunately, one can say that has taken something away from Nigel's championship. Now, whether he thinks he could have won the championship in a McLaren or in a Benetton or in a Ferrari, I have to say I doubt very much, because it was this car that gave Mansell the opportunity to win his first World Championship, to have won so many Grand Prix, 9 Grand Prix in a season, setting up new records. So technology, it's all right when it works for you, but if it's not, if you don't have it, then it's a bad thing. And in fact, just talking on that subject, there is a meeting taking place here this weekend with all the teams, and Flavio Briatore, I think the team boss, one would have to call him, of Benetton, has put forward a formula for Grand Prix racing in the future, and one might call it Formula 3500, and it's based around a package which would have an 8-cylinder engine, no more than 8 cylinders, have a 13,000 rev limit. Now that all ties in very nicely indeed with what Michael Schumacher has also been expressing. Now Michael Schumacher, who has done absolute miracles this year for Benetton, he's been saying that, well, I think we've reached the development, we've reached the limit of the potential. Now we see Schumacher on the circuit. He's saying that really, I can't wring any more out of this car. There's not enough power, we're not getting enough out of the chassis, out of the downforce on the car, and really, you know, I don't know how much more I can do. Now, I wonder, is it coincidence that what Schumacher is saying and what Briatore is putting to all the other teams in Formula One is sheer coincidence?
Michael Schumacher, who was brewing in the wet at Spa when he won his first Grand Prix. Some might call it luck, because he changed tyres at exactly the right time. On the other end, still had to keep it on the island, John, and I think that first win was a very good one for Michael Schumacher, who's in his first full year of Formula One, and teammate Martin Brundle, who is down in 13th place on the grid, is not having a happy time. And well, Martin's Formula One future doesn't look too bright at the moment, I must say.
Well, he certainly spent the morning. He didn't go out this morning for that unofficial session, still suffering the effects of food poisoning. And I have to say, Martin is not really the most adventurous eater. He's more a chicken in a basket type of eater than getting into the raw fish and sushi and all the other delights that Japan has to offer. But whatever it was he's eaten, he's still feeling the effects of it. And quite frankly, there's nothing for him to learn today. Schumacher can do the basic running. He'll go out, establish a time, and I would just think they'll put a little bit more downforce into the car. The days of softening these cars off for wet weather conditions has more or less disappeared. So it's just a few laps for Michael Schumacher, and they'll put that car back into the box and start their race preparation and hope that Sunday morning is not like Saturday afternoon.
Ooh, look at that car.
Now those are puddles, those are streams of water running diagonally across the straight, and just as you come into this final left-hand corner, again you can see heavy water lying there. Now the wet weather tire clears the water ordinarily very efficiently, but when you get deep puddles, you get sudden aquaplaning, and it's a real heart-stopping moment for any driver. And they're still doing about 120 miles an hour as they go through that corner.
Another thing, John, is aquaplaning is one thing. Yeah, the other thing is that the ride height is so low that I think what might happen is that the car would just aquaplane on the bottom, really, while we're looking at Naspetti.
I think to do that, you'd have to have a lot more water than we are seeing here. But of course, there are streams running across, and that's quite conceivable. That's one of the disadvantages of the current Formula One specification. The cars do run so low to the ground. Effectively, there's very little suspension movement as a consequence. So if they do find deep, deep water, the whole underbody, that carbon fiber tray that's fitted underneath the chassis, covers the engine and gearbox and exits behind the gearbox. It acts as a toboggan. In effect, you've got a car that just plows across any major obstacle in its course.
Naspetti, who made his Grand Prix debut in Spa in the wet, and he's done 2 Grand Prix so far, and I must say he's not done too badly. He's out-qualified Carl Wendlinger. His best result for the moment is a 11th place finish, or he's done 3 Grand Prix, of course, in Portugal, and his best qualifying position was on his debut when he qualified in 21st position. Now, we don't know, after that, you know, Gustav Brunner left the team. I'm not sure whether the team sort of got a bit lost on settings, John.
I think that they have lost something because Gustav Brunner is a very good engineer. We mentioned this in Portugal, and he works very well with young drivers coming into Formula One. Not a man like Nigel Mansell, a good old warhorse, our Nigel, and he's just going through the process of doing it at the time of the Grand Prix. Of course, the Grand Prix starting an hour earlier here in Japan, and Nigel just checking out the grip from the traction control as he left the pit lane, and pretty effective it is. But look at the volume of water. That's the right-hand side of the pit straight. Lots and lots of water. Now, if the Grand Prix were to start in conditions like this, it would be almost impossible for anybody not on the front row of the grid to see where the track was. And I think Nigel will come back in and be fairly vocal about just how difficult these conditions are. And I mean, literally, as we're talking, the rain is still falling, and with such a small number of cars out on the circuit, you're not getting the benefit of the water being cleared away. There's no hint of a dry, not even a dry line, a line appearing.
Well, Nigel, probably having chosen the most wet time to go out on the circuit, his first laps, to see what it is like, and well, we can all see what it's like. Michael Schumacher still smiling. He's enjoying himself in Japan. We're going to take a short break here on Eurosport, and then we're back with more action from Japan. Senna at Suzuka. You're watching Eurosport and the second official qualifying session for tomorrow's Japanese Grand Prix, and while Mansell is out on the circuit, Ayrton Senna stays in the pits, and we haven't seen the McLaren out yet, John, have we?
No, Allard, they've remained in their garages, and I have to think that that's probably where both Berger and Senna would prefer to stay. They, of course, went out in the morning and found out what the conditions are like, and really nothing has changed a great deal, so I wouldn't be surprised to see either McLaren not come out. But what is interesting is that the team boss of McLaren, Ron Dennis, has finally arrived here at Suzuka, and he's been working very hard over the last number of weeks trying to put together an engine package, and of course everybody believed, and Eurosport commentators are amongst them, that the Renault engine that Ligier has had this year would be the package that McLaren would have for 1993. But that situation appears to be changing. It doesn't appear to be quite so conclusive as we maybe thought some 4 weeks ago. And in fact, rumours are abounding that McLaren could have a Ford HB engine. There's even discussions about the Hart, the new V10 Hart engine. Now that, I believe, will be in Formula One next year with a team that is currently in Formula One. And McLaren are apparently looking at that engine as well. So what McLaren are going to end up with is still as unclear as it was after the announcement of Honda's decision to withdraw from Formula One back in Portugal.
John, we've done a lot of talking about that Hart engine, and it seems that everybody that has seen it, and people we know, that Jordan people have seen the engine and footwork people have seen the engine, they're all impressed by it. They're impressed by the dyno figures, but it hasn't actually run in the car yet, and whatever team is going to use it, it is a big gamble, isn't it?
Any engine that's totally new is going to be a risk, of course, but those people who have seen the engine running, and I gather that on regular 4-star fuel from the nearest petrol pump to Brian Hart's factory up in Harlow, say the engine's showing up about 710 horsepower. Now that's literally the fuel that you or I can go and buy if we're ever passing through Harlow. There's nothing like the fuel that currently, even with the limitations that are being imposed on the fuel companies, the fuels are still specifically tailored. And one thing about fuel is, if you buy your fuel in Germany, it is not going to be the same fuel that you would buy in England or Italy or France or Spain, even though it could come from the same company, because fuel is blended to suit particular needs, particular climatic conditions. So it is quite difficult to say the fuel in England, which is a regular 4-star fuel, is the same as what, say, Nigel Mansell has got from Elf powering his Renault engine. But anyway, 710 horsepower is the figure I've been told, and that's a very respectable figure. But of course, we have to see that Hart engine in a chassis to really be able to judge just how competitive it will be. But I suspect, with the knowledge Brian Hart has of the Fords, the HBs, the cars with HB engine, it's going to be pretty good.
Well, and going down that route, let's say for instance Jordan, they can probably go with a Ford HB engine. Then they know what they've got. They know they can do roughly what Lotus can do at the moment, so qualify well inside the top 10 and score points. But you are looking for that little bit extra, which the Ford HB can't give at the moment.
No, I was just watching Nigel Mansell. I mean, really, those conditions now are getting worse and worse, and coming down that pit straight, the car was moving all over the place. Those puddles causing very severe aquaplaning, and look, this is really wet right now. But going back to that engine situation, obviously the Ford HB engine is the easiest package to install. But bear in mind what Michael Schumacher was saying. He is maintaining that, you know, the package really, we've got to the limit of it. We need, oh, and Mansell again, in major aquaplaning coming through that left-hand corner. So you're going back again for the second time to the engine situation. What a team will look for, obviously, is performance and reliability, but what we're also going to look at is potential. And it's not unknown that a 10-cylinder engine basically can produce more power than an 8. Likewise, a 12 can produce more than a 10. But the downsides of a 12 are now being fairly clearly established, and I think anybody who wants to be competitive in 1993 really is going to have to discard a 12-cylinder engine and go to a V10. That seems to be the optimum package in terms of overall performance, drivability, flexibility, economy, power, all the factors, all the compromises that are so essential in the building of a successful Grand Prix team car combination.
If you listen to Nigel Mansell's engine, you probably think you're hearing a misfire, while he's 2.5 seconds faster than Gianni Morbidelli was at this stage. Morbidelli is still the fastest driver out on the circuit. Well, it isn't a misfire in Mansell's engine. Let's listen to this. That is very definitely traction control. It called us out in France, didn't it, John?
Well, traction control, what in effect it does is cut out a number of cylinders. Look at that water. I mean, that is, I mean, you could water ski behind that. It effectively cuts out a number of cylinders, which is what then causes that flat sounding note. And it, of course, reduces the horsepower. The driver still keeps his foot flat down on the throttle, and it allows the onboard computer to then judge when to bring in the remaining 2, 4, or whatever number of cylinders that particular device cuts out. Well, Mansell has recorded the quickest lap to date, 2:07.703, and that was a very courageous lap from Mansell, because those conditions are truly appalling. And Mansell now cruising back very slowly to the pits, and I think he'll decide that's what he's done, and he's not going to do any more.
Probably call it a day.
Well, I think he'll be very advised to do so. There's nothing to be achieved any longer. Then we see Michele Alboreto.
Well, 2 Grand Prix more for Michele in that footwork with the Mugen engine.
And I'd also, it's one of the things that the drivers and teams that are Japanese owned or Japanese sponsored or have got Japanese engines, is that you've got to go out and perform.
Yeah.
And you're expected to, because there are a lot of people here, both corporate and spectators, who want to see these Japanese-owned, sponsored engine cars running. So it's the downside of being in one of those situations.
167 Grand Prix for Michele Alboreto. He's won 5. And,
yep.
Well, that's a popular figure, isn't it?
It's not a bad figure. There's a few drivers around who have won 5 Grand Prix in their career.
Yeah, Patrese.
Yeah, yes. But let's look at qualifying maximum speeds. This is from Friday afternoon. And in fact, all the top speeds considerably down than last year, Allard. Now, we know that Ferrari, and in particular Harvey Postlethwaite, has been telling us how bad the Ferrari engine is. He's saying that, oh, we're 3 ratios lower than we were in 1991. We're about 5 or 6 kilometers slower down the straight. Well, I've been talking to a few other team managers, and they've given me the same story. And in fact, down that straight, the quickest car yesterday was Nigel Mansell at 182 miles an hour, 293 kilometers per hour. So that's about 10 miles an hour, I think, down in 1991. Across the start-finish straight, Mansell again was quickest, but Ayrton Senna second quickest there. The speed 173.71, 279 kilometers per hour. Now, I don't know why those speeds are less, because the engines are probably not very much less powerful, because at this time last year, of course, very tricky fuels are being used, so there is a small reduction in horsepower. The other factor, I think, probably, which is a major contribution, is that out of the chicane, those qualifying tyres really did work. It's out of a slow corner that you get the maximum benefit from a qualifying tyre. And of course, we don't have qualifying tyres in 92. Well, that's offset, I think, to some extent by the traction control. But that extra bite certainly did help shoot a car onto the straight that little bit quicker.
Talking about maximum speed, John, 193 mile an hour for Nigel Mansell on the second intermediate, and also 173 mile an hour on, sorry, 182 mile an hour, and 173 mile an hour down start finish. In the wet, it was 166 and 162.
I think he was very brave, because at that speed, if you catch one of those puddles, one of those streams, you will have a very, very fast trip, probably into the barrier, do a lot of damage to the car, and of course hurt yourself into the bargain.
Now, 166 mile an hour he had on the second intermediate. He was roughly the same speed as teammate Riccardo Patrese, about 4 mile an hour faster than Morbidelli. Now, Morbidelli, who is second fastest in this session, did only 151 mile an hour on start finish. Now, that is probably what traction control does for you.
It's a combination, Allard. I think traction control obviously is a big asset in these conditions, but also I think the Williams has considerably more downforce, which enables the 2 Williams drivers to get on with the program that much earlier. They've got more confidence to get the foot right down to the floor. And I think Morbidelli's effort actually is quite outstanding, because that is not a particularly good car. We've seen the difficulties drivers have had with it throughout the year, and really a very courageous effort from Morbidelli. But interestingly, again referring to Ferrari, Harvey Postlethwaite has been saying that he thinks the Ferrari engine is so bad that in fact the Lamborghini engine is considerably better. Michele Alboreto indulging himself a little bit on the exit of that hairpin bend. As we revert back to the Williams pit, Nigel out of his car, Sheridan Thin, commercial director at Williams, who is shortly to leave the team, and in part people believe that's due to the whole Mansell saga. That of course is another classic, the film version of the Mansell saga about to be made. The Mansell tapes, of course, vying with other famous tapes in the past, going to be published as well, and we'll get the truth of the whole situation that occurred throughout the second half of this season with the new world champion.
You were talking about the Lamborghini engine being a very good engine at the moment, John. That will be exclusively used by the Venturi LaRousse team next year, and they will keep the same driver lineup, Gasho and Katayama. So there's only one team that will be using that Lamborghini engine, and Minardi might well go and use that Ford engine.
Well, we think there's about potentially 6 or so teams that might be using the Ford HB in 1993. I don't know how Cosworth or the other companies that would work with Cosworth could cope with that volume of engines. Certainly they could maybe at most handle 4 teams, but 6 to me really is an awful lot.
So going back to the Brian Hart engine, it might be well wise to go with Brian Hart then and be the only customer.
Absolutely.
Well, we're going to take another short break here on Eurosport, and after that we go back to what very wet Suzuka Circuit. And John, with, well, everything falling into place, there's going to be a lot of drivers on the sidelines, and there might be some surprises in cars.
We're still waiting to see quite where Michele Alboreto is going to end up, and I really wonder, is this a punishment or a reward for all the efforts that Michele Alboreto has put into the footwork team over the last 2 years? Certainly we have not seen teammate Aguri Suzuki out so far this session, and I certainly would have thought that being the leading Japanese driver currently, that he would be out there in front of all those thousands of Japanese fans. They hero worship him. He is a mega star in Japan. Forget about Nigel Mansell, Ayrton Senna, Alan Prost, or anybody else. Aguri Suzuki is the man, yet he's not out on the circuit. But we were talking a little earlier before the commercial break about the LaRousse team and that Gasho and Katayama are remaining. I think that's a very good decision by the team. They've got 2 guys who've done basically a good job in 1992, and a very important element on any team is continuity. If you are constantly changing drivers, new faces, new temperaments, new approaches, sometimes old temperaments and approaches, it doesn't allow the team to grow, and you have to grow as a partnership. LaRousse is going to have that. We've seen, for example, with Jordan last year, Bertrand Gachot drove for them, Andrea de Cesaris was there as well. They both moved on to different teams in 1992. At Jordan in 92, Stefano Modena came in, Maurizio Gugelmin. Now, who are going to, oh, look at that. And that really is bad. Those conditions, I would think, are close to being undrivable, certainly unraceable. And if this is going to be what we have on Sunday at 1 o'clock, well, there'll be a lot of extremely unhappy Grand Prix drivers. We remember back in Australia last year when light conditions really caused a great deal of concern and upset amongst the drivers. They did not want to start the race, and well, they had to. I think that the clerk of the course in these conditions should really start the race, if it is going to be wet on Sunday, behind the safety car. The race has to basically start at the predetermined time. That, I think, is something that everybody in motor racing must accept. But what you maybe would prefer to do is to start the race behind the safety car. It might sound a strange thing to say, but at least the race does start at the predetermined time. And then if conditions deteriorate or it becomes totally impossible, then they can stop the race and wait until conditions clear up.
Of course, the Japanese Grand Prix has known to be wet in the past. 76 at Fuji was wet when Mario Andretti won, and of course in 77 when James Hunt won the Grand Prix. I think that was a wet one as well.
I don't think 77 was wet. I was there. Certainly 76 was appalling, and that was at Fuji, and they had, again, they didn't have rivers, they had lakes on the main straight. Fuji notorious for enormous, I mean, puddles the size of a football pitch. I went through one of them, spun about 5 times, and found myself still going in the right direction when I came across the lake. And I think I lost a couple of places into that corner, but didn't really make an awful lot of difference, to be truthful. Nobody behind could say a thing. and it's only by seeing photographs of it recently that I've actually been able to clarify what did happen in that fairly high-speed moment.
John, do I remember right, it was a Japanese-built car and driver on Japanese tyres, or that was very, very quick in the wet, because they had those special
Absolutely
tyres.
spot on, Allard. They had those very, very deep, they call them monsoon tyres in Japan. Dunlop and other tire makers, Bridgestone, I think in fact it was on, look at, you could do with some of those monsoon tyres right now at Suzuka. And by monsoon, the tread depth was probably a couple of millimeters deeper than the conventional wet weather tyre that Goodyear are providing. And it was with those tyres, of course, that I forget which particular chassis it was, and it really set the whole Formula One world rolling, because they didn't expect a Japanese car, Japanese driver, or the Japanese tyres to be so effective. But well, that's local knowledge. And there he is, the man, Ron Dennis, and Mr. Julian Jacobi, that is Ayrton Senna's personal lawyer. He travels with him to every Grand Prix. He is the man who will be in the middle of any negotiations that will take place for 1993. Gerhard Berger, of course, a very happy man indeed. He doesn't look it there right now, but he's got one of the best deals for next year in Formula One. Getting billions of lira to drive for Ferrari. He is the #1 driver there. And a next Honda employee, whose name has just escaped me, Mr. not Noda. So Gerhard Berger now two races away from ending a career at McLaren, which maybe did not fulfill as much of the expectations of McLaren and of Berger, but I think he will go to Ferrari a very, very much more complete racing driver. His knowledge and insight into the commitment of being a Grand Prix driver will be a great deal more complete. And Ayrton Senna, the man who has rewritten the rule book about being a committed Grand Prix driver, seemingly recovered from that sickness he had following the Portuguese Grand Prix on the Monday morning after the race. He was certainly very unwell. Fortunately, it didn't affect him in the race. And Ayrton, I think, has decided that he is not going to go out this afternoon now. He's going to stand there and watch those few, let's call them courageous Grand Prix drivers who have ventured onto the Suzuka circuit. And I think Michele Alboreto this is real penance right now.
Well, Alboreto...
he's coming into the pits. He's had enough. He's done 3 laps.
I was going to say, with all respect for Michele, I mean, I didn't really know what he was doing out there.
In fact, what he did 5 laps. He did an out lap, 3 timed laps, and a 5th final lap to come into the pits. So
we probably had a lot of fun.
I doubt it very much. I mean, watching that car coming down past the pits, it's not much fun, I tell you, at 150 odd miles an hour when that thing decides to step 12 feet to the left or 12 feet to the right.
You're a passenger.
Absolutely.
So Nigel Mansell is the fastest, but it's all a bit academic here in Suzuka. There is about 15 minutes left on this qualifying session here in Suzuka, and we will see them after the break here on Eurosport. And of course we stay with it. We can't get away from Formula One. We'll be back in a sec here on Eurosport with more coverage from Suzuka. And
I will regret the day that Ferrari ever decide that Formula One is either too expensive, or for whatever other reasons they may choose, would withdraw. That will be, I think, the saddest day, should it ever happen, should it ever arise in Formula One history, because that team, its name is still as charismatic as it was way back in the late 40s and early 50s when we first saw the first 1.5 litre V12 supercharged Ferraris, which weren't particularly successful, but then the further 4.5 litre V12. In fact, just the very car that we had back in Hungary, I sat in one of those cars, and that was then the car that went on to dominate Grand Prix racing for, well, a number of years. And of course, ever since then, that name has represented Formula One in a way that no other team really has succeeded in doing.
We've had out in this second qualifying session 8 cars. Well, 9 cars, I must say, but only 8 posted a time. Naspetti did not post a time. He went out and straight back in, while you were watching Nicola Larini. Mansell went out, did a 2:07.7. Patrese did out, was 3rd fastest, did a 2:13.9. Schumacher did an 11-minute lap for some reason. He either went out very slow or came straight back in. That could have been it. The Cesaris went out, did a 2:13. Morbidelli did a 2:10.2 in his second fastest. Modena a 2:19. Katayama, who probably just said hello to all his Japanese fans out there, did a 5-minute 40 lap. And then Michele Alboreto we saw doing 5 laps and ended up with a 2:25.413. Nigel Mansell and Riccardo Patrese, they will be on the front row for tomorrow's Japanese Grand Prix. It's Mansell's 30th pole position, and it's the 10th time this year we've got a Williams front row lockout, John.
Well, it's no surprise. That is the car, that is the team that has been utterly dominant in 1992, and again looking towards 1993, all the advantages that the Williams team have been working so long and have now realized the advantages, the benefits from, unless there is something introduced to negate that advantage, I don't see anybody beating whoever drives those Williams next year. Certainly Alain Prost will be in one of those 2 cars. Williams have chosen to wait until at the earliest after the Australian Grand Prix before they decide who they will put in the second car, and all sorts of names are coming into the frame. One very disappointed man, of course, was Martin Brundle. He thought he was the favourite, and he had been, I think, in fact, led to believe that he was the man that Williams were going to put into that car. And then suddenly he had a phone call one Thursday evening from Franken to say, sorry, chap, we're not interested in you anymore, and we wouldn't want to stand in your way of any other opportunities that exist. So that was about it. The contracts, in fact, had been drawn up, and they were just going through the final form, and it was just a question of actually both parties signing them. Martin got that close. Damon Hill, of course, the test driver for the Williams team, is waiting in the wings. But obviously there's something that the Williams team feel they know that has not yet been stated clearly to the world at large, because otherwise, why wait? I mean, what reason do they have for not signing someone like Martin Brundle, for example, or taking a chance and giving Damon Hill that drive of a lifetime? Maybe there's somebody else who's going to make an unexpected move. I can't see Ayrton Senna getting that car, as much as Ayrton would still relish the opportunity. I know Nigel Mansell actually would love to see Senna and Prost together. Probably it would be very destructive to the team, but boy, wouldn't you have some fun if you're on the sidelines.
That's the front row for tomorrow's Grand Prix. The second row, Ayrton Senna and Gerhard Berger. And John, I think Honda must be very disappointed not to have a front row position or even pole position. They've made a huge effort. They've built special engines for Suzuka, but then Renault built a qualifying engine and they've got that front row.
Nigel Mansell is very appreciative of all the efforts that Renault have made, and in particular here at Suzuka. He's been crying out, he says, for a qualifying engine. Renault have held it back. It now has been provided in Suzuka. It's given the Williams team an advantage. I'll put it this way, it's given Mansell an advantage because Riccardo Patrese is only a 1/10 of a second quicker than Ayrton Senna. Honda certainly would like to have been in the front row of the grid. It is very important, and here they want to go out. This is their last Japanese Grand Prix for some time. They would like to go out on a very high note, and of course you can only do so much with an engine. An engine is only one element in a Grand Prix car, and if the chassis is not up to the scratch, if it's not up to the level of the competition, it doesn't really matter how good your engine is on a circuit in particular like Suzuka, you're just not going to be on the pace.
So Ayrton Senna and Gerhard Berger. Then Michael Schumacher is on the third row, and I think, surprised, it's his best qualifying performance ever in his life. Johnny Herbert is on the third row of the grid, and I personally dearly hope Johnny can sort of get rid of that bad luck he's had over those last Grand Prix. The last time he actually finished a Grand Prix was the French Grand Prix at Magny-Cours, and he's 6th on the grid.
The second half of the season has swung more in the favour of Mika Hakkinen, and Mika seemed to rise to that as well. He seemed to accept and go for the opportunities. He drove some absolutely blinding races. while, as you say, Johnny Herbert was seemingly well, that's a red flag now being shown. You can see it just at the top of the left of the screen. So qualifying is being halted here at Suzuka. But certainly Johnny Herbert back on form. He certainly did not lose form, let's say. There was more circumstance. And of course, if you go through a bad patch, it can affect you slightly in that you begin to think, well, what's going to go wrong next? Whereas if your teammate has everything flowing in their favor, then he appears to have all the advantages. So let's hope for Lotus and for Johnny Herbert that he's regained that form, but the reliability of his car also has been regained.
Well, you were talking about Mika Häkkinen. He's 7th on the grid, so Lotus right in there. Eric Comas is 8th, Andrea de Cesare is 9th, Thierry Boutsen 10th, Nicola Larini is 11th, and that's the fastest Ferrari. Christian Fittipaldi is 12th, Martin Brundle 13th, disappointing, but he does have food poisoning, as you pointed out earlier, John. Morbidelli 14th, Alesi is 15th, and that is a big disappointment. But if the conditions are, well, a little bit better like this, I mean, that man could charge, eh?
He will charge, and we remember way back in the early part of the European season, that race in Barcelona, and an absolute blinding race. I mean, at times I thought Jean Alesi had lost all sense, because even with bumping into, I think, from memory, 3 cars throughout the course of the Grand Prix, still finished up on the podium. And I mean, in reality, one wonders, could he have tackled Schumacher and Nigel Mansell had he stayed on the circuit? Well, here we're seeing the course cars. I don't think there's a car off the circuit. Certainly the red flag is out. Everybody is back in the pits. The only thing I would worry about is, with these conditions, the medical helicopter, which has to be, there have to be at least 2 available. And well, the conditions here are now probably just about on the limit for any helicopter flights, but also the nearest major city to Suzuka is Nagoya. We don't know what conditions are like at Nagoya, so if a helicopter, for example, was required, it might be able to take off from Suzuka, but it may not be able to get into Nagoya, and that therefore would create a situation which would preclude qualifying for the remaining part of the day.
Well, we've had a lot of red flags in qualifying sessions this year, but I think this one will be stopped altogether, because there's no way positions will change. All 26 cars have qualified, because there is only 26 cars, and look at this, it's bucketing down. There we see the top 8 on the grid. We've gone through them with you, Mansell and Patrese, and I think Herbert, Häkkinen and Comas, that's an interesting bit, and let's just hope the Ligiers will not attack Herbert this time.
Well, Herbert really is going to be trying to slipstream immediately off Michael Schumacher. There's only a 1/10 of a second between them.
The Cesares, Boutsen, Larini, Fittipaldi, Brundle, Morbidelli, Alesi and Suzuki. That's the next 8. And Aguri Suzuki on the circuit, where he has had his best Formula 1 result to date, must be a bit disappointed in 16th place. And there we see the rest up to number 24, where Katayama qualifies in 20th place for his very first Grand Prix, and that is actually, no, it's not his best qualifying position, because that was 11th in Canada. Well, Gujimin and Naspetti, well, I've got to say Naspetti did have a misfire all through the sessions yesterday and this morning, so that time is not really representative.
Well, it just reinforces what we've been saying throughout the season, that you have to do the business on Friday. If you have a problem, you cannot rely on Saturday being a fair day, and here is the best example of that. And now you see marshals and probably some of the press, in fact, taking a shortcut back to the pits, and I do suspect that this is the end of Saturday qualifying in Suzuka, and probably for most people about 43 minutes too late, because it was probably very reluctantly that anybody went out. But teams, some of the teams, regardless of conditions, they will always send at least 1 car out just to find out. Those teams are probably the better financed, the better organized teams. But nonetheless, it's important to know what conditions are like, but you don't want to be out there more than, let's say, 3 flying laps at maximum.
There's an important thing I like to get across to all our viewers across Europe. The warm-up for the Japanese Grand Prix will be live on Eurosport, and it will be from midnight to 1 o'clock tonight. That is before the clock goes back in England. So whether you're in England or on the continent, midnight to 1 o'clock is Japanese Grand Prix warm-up time. Then for the race proper, if you're on the continent, it's 5 o'clock the start will be. We'll be on air just before that to give you all the latest information from Suzuka. But if you're in England, it's 4 to 6, so don't get caught out by the clock. 4 to 6 whether you're in England, and 5 to 7 when you're on the continent, and wherever you are, midnight to 1 o'clock for the warm-up. Well, of course, cars going around. Oh, look at this.
Well, I mean, that,
Want to fancy a swim, John?
I mean, talk about a lake. I mean, you could take your radio-controlled power boats out in that. You could go for a quick dip. And that is very wide indeed. And a car going through that, something in the region of 160 miles an hour, is going to discover what aquaplaning. Redefine the word aquaplane going through that. If you can get through it as straight as you entered it, you'll be a very lucky person indeed. And again, you can see just the camera position changed just at the entry to the corner at the end of pit straight. Again, water running across just at the point where you're still in the brakes and beginning to make the turn in. And really very, very difficult conditions indeed. There is, in fact, a natural lake in the center of the circuit. And hopefully nobody will ever get near to that. The ever-present, enthusiastic Japanese Suzuka crews out cleaning off any rubbish that may have been put onto the circuit.
Well, there's some fortunate people, I suppose, John. All the mechanics working on the cars, I think they'll be in for a fairly early night tonight, because, you know, some of them don't really have to. Some cars just didn't even go out.
There still may have to be significant big changes, because there will be a complete kit of parts which is specifically for the race. They will all probably have 4 brand new corners. Some of the teams, of course, have fitted qualifying engines as well, so they'll have to come out. The gearbox, complete replacement gearbox package will be bolted on. So there will still be a lot of work tonight, but hopefully for the majority of the teams, a lot less than had they had a full qualifying session. So there you see another one of the thousands of Brazilian supporters that somehow or other, and that's not a familiar face in Ayrton Senna's helmet, a true Ayrton Senna fan, and I wonder is that one that he's just had a direct copy. In fact, I think one of the helmet manufacturers were making Senna replica helmets, and that man's certainly big Ayrton Senna fan. There we see some Japanese Ferrari enthusiasts, and in spite of appalling weather, there's still probably close to 100,000 people here watching this qualifying session. Well, such as it is, it's now effectively finished.
By the way, what's the weather forecast for tomorrow?
Well, we think it's going to be less wet than today. In fact, it may be dry, Allard. Now, that's as accurate as I can give you. My weather vane so far has not really been pointing outside too frequently, and
we can get the old Allardism in, John. It might rain, although it might not.
Exactly. Exactly. So we're hoping for a dry race, but it is difficult to predict quite what will happen. Hopefully there's been enough water falling over this last 8-hour period to basically drain the tank.
Well, yes, John, we are hoping for a dry race, but wouldn't it be more spectacular if we started on a wet circuit which was drying out very slowly? I mean, that's one of your favorites, isn't it?
Yeah, Allard, for us in the commentary booth, it'd be great.
Exactly.
But I mean, what about those poor 26 punters out there? They're all going to try and do their best. Everybody wants to get a good result. And of course, the last races of the season, while the championship is not really in contention, there is still a fight for second and third place in that championship. Also, from a manufacturing championship point of view, very, very important indeed. All those teams are going to be battling away. You've got McLaren with 83 points, Camel, Benetton, Ford with 77. So that battle is significant. Likewise, Williams, 154 points. They're going to want to increase that number of points. The more points a team generates in the season, the more money they get the following season.
Well, this was the second qualifying session from Suzuka. Well, it wasn't much of a qualifying session because of the rain. Nigel Mansell, his 30th pole position tomorrow morning, and the 10th Williams lockout on the front row. Remember, 12:30 to 1 is the warm-up, and that's midnight, half past midnight to 1, and 5 o'clock or 4 o'clock the race starts.